You know, love has a strange way of revealing who we truly are. When someone touches the places in us we've hidden for years, our patterns start to tremble. The mask we wear in casual encounters begins to slip, and what remains is not who we pretend to be, but who we are when our hearts are finally seen. You know, love often reveals us not by what we say, but by how we withdraw. The way someone pulls back, the way their energy shifts from warmth to coolness, from presence to absence. It's not always indifference. Sometimes it's protection. Sometimes it's the soul whispering, I don't know how to be this close without losing myself. There is a kind of person who fears connection even as they crave it. They want to be seen, but only through the window of control, never through the door of vulnerability. When you are just an option to them, they remain in that window, always visible, never reachable. They offer fragments, a text that half expresses care, a meeting that feels spontaneous but scheduled on their terms, a compliment wrapped in emotional distance. You begin to notice it. They are always there, yet never truly here. It's as though they mastered the art of being present enough to keep you hoping, but absent enough to keep themselves safe. And it's not because they do not feel. In fact, they often feel too much. They have simply learned that safety and intimacy rarely coexist. They've seen love as something that consumes rather than completes, so they ration affection like a scarce resource. When they sense emotional gravity pulling them closer, they start measuring every word, every gesture, a quiet calculation hidden behind calm eyes. It's a delicate balancing act, a dance between wanting to belong and fearing to disappear within another person. To love someone like this is to hold a bird that is both desperate to be free and terrified of being alone. They need space to breathe, yet that same space becomes the distance that starves connection. They want closeness, but only in doses small enough to survive. They do not reject love. They reject the loss of control that love demands. For them, intimacy feels like surrender, and surrender feels unsafe, as if the very act of opening up might unravel all the defenses they've spent a lifetime building. So they live in fragments, half promises, half truths, half emotions. They show affection in ways that are hard to measure, subtle, quiet, and often confusing. You may find yourself questioning, do they care, or do they simply not want to lose what I offer? And perhaps the painful truth is that they care more than they know how to express. But caring to them feels dangerous, as if love is a game that always ends with someone leaving. And so they give just enough to keep you believing, yet never enough to risk believing themselves. It's not manipulation, it's survival. The distance they maintain is the only language they've learned to protect their heart. When they sense you reaching deeper, they retreat into silence, because silence feels safer than explaining what they can't even name. Inside that quiet withdrawal, they are wrestling with their own fear, the fear of being consumed, misunderstood, or dependent on something they cannot control. It's a strange paradox. They long for love, but only in ways that don't require them to face love's mirror. Because when you love deeply, love reflects everything, your past wounds, your insecurities, your unhealed spaces, and they're not ready to face those reflections yet. So instead, they stay on the surface, floating between affection and detachment, connection and withdrawal. This is what emotional minimalism looks like, a kind of affection that exists in half-light. They may text you good morning, but rarely share what's troubling them at night. They may show up for dinner, but leave before the conversation turns intimate. They may laugh with you, touch you, enjoy you, but you'll feel it, that invisible line where their soul refuses to cross. It's the boundary of self-preservation disguised as calm independence. To the untrained eye, it looks like strength. They're just independent, people might say. They value their space. But if you look closer, really closer, you'll see it's not independence, it's fear. The kind of fear that learned long ago that love is unpredictable. The kind that remembers the sting of being unseen, of being left, of being told that feelings are too much, too heavy, too inconvenient. So they turn love into something they can manage, small, tidy, and emotionally risk-free. Yet no matter how well they manage it, something inside them still aches. You can sense it. That quiet yearning that never finds peace. Because no matter how fiercely they protect themselves, the heart always hungers for what it was built to give. We are not meant to survive on half love. The soul cannot thrive in emotional minimalism. It may keep you safe, but safety without intimacy becomes a kind of spiritual starvation. They will talk about freedom, how they don't need anyone, how they like being on their own. But if you listen carefully, you'll hear the loneliness between their words. Their independence is both armor and exile. They have mistaken solitude for peace, when in truth it's a quiet echo of self-protection. They want connection, but they want it without the chaos of vulnerability. So they call their avoidance freedom, and convince themselves that needing no one is power. But deep down, they know freedom without intimacy is emptiness dressed as strength. It's a lonely kind of existence, one that feels stable yet hollow. Because when everything must remain under control, there is no room for spontaneity, no room for emotional mess, no room for love's beautiful unpredictability. They live behind emotional glass, watching connection happen, feeling it through the safety of distance. But no matter how convincing the glass wall, the soul knows it's still imprisoned. And perhaps that's what love is trying to teach them. That true freedom is not found in withdrawal, but in surrender. That independence is not the absence of closeness, but the confidence to be yourself within it. That love is not a loss of self, but an expansion of it. Because when you are just an option, they can maintain control. But when love truly touches them, when it starts asking for their heart instead of their performance, everything they've built begins to tremble. And that trembling, that inner cracking, is not weakness, it's awakening. It's the moment the armor realizes it cannot feel. It's the moment safety starts to feel suffocating. It's the soul remembering what it was meant for. Connection, vulnerability, truth, the very things they've avoided are the very things that would finally set them free. So yes, when you are just an option, they will remain distant, calm, and seemingly untouchable. But beneath that distance is a longing they can't admit. A longing to be chosen, not as a trophy, not as an idea, but as a place to rest. They just don't yet know how to rest in love without fearing they'll lose themselves. Maybe that's why we must learn to see them not as cold, but as guarded, not as heartless, but as heart-heavy. Because understanding their silence is not the same as accepting their distance. You can love them deeply and still refuse to shrink for their comfort. You can see their fear and still honor your own need for presence. For love, in its truest form, does not chase, it invites, it does not demand, it awakens. And in that awakening, we start to realize something profound, that we've all been avoidants in some way. We've all built walls around our tenderness, called it strength, and then wondered why love feels distant. We've all rationed our hearts, offered half-truths, and called it caution. But perhaps the real courage is not in guarding love, but in allowing it to undo us a little, to soften what has grown hard, to reopen what has been sealed. Because the moment we stop measuring love, the moment we stop managing closeness, something miraculous happens. The illusion of control dissolves, and in its place, we discover a peace that doesn't come from distance, but from presence. A peace that whispers, it's okay to feel deeply, it's okay to risk, it's okay to be seen. That is the journey from emotional minimalism to fullness, from fear to faith, from independence to interconnection, from surviving love to finally living it. There's a moment you start to feel it, the shift, the subtle pulling away, the warmth that once felt natural begins to cool, not suddenly, but gradually, like a candle flickering out at the edge of night. They're still there. But something about their presence feels less anchored. You can almost sense them drifting. Not with anger, not even with disinterest, but with a quiet fear they can't name. That's how avoidance moves. Not in storms, but in gentle vanishings. They don't slam doors, they fade, they retreat into smaller spaces, not out of cruelty but confusion. When love begins to ask for more depth, for more truth, they begin to fear that the ground beneath them is too fragile to hold it. So they pull away, trying to protect themselves from the very thing they've longed for. You see, closeness feels like fire to them. Beautiful, but dangerous. Every moment of intimacy ignites both desire and dread. And in that paradox, they learn to survive by disappearing just before the flame reaches them. It isn't always a physical absence. Sometimes it's emotional. Their words become shallow. Their laughter sounds rehearsed, and their eyes, once bright with connection, start looking somewhere else, as though they're trying to find a place to hide their tenderness. And if you ask them what's wrong, they'll likely say, nothing. Not because there is nothing, but because everything feels too hard to explain. Silence becomes their safe house, a way to escape without leaving. They will retreat into their world of solitude, where control still feels possible. The heart may ache, but at least in isolation, they know the rules. No one can betray them there. No one can abandon them, because they've already done the leaving first. To them, distance is not rejection, it's protection. The absence is a language, one that says, I don't know how to stay without losing myself. When and yet, this self-preservation comes with a cost. In their attempt to avoid pain, they also avoid healing. In their quest to stay in control, they lose the very thing that makes love meaningful: surrender. They keep their emotions so tightly bound that even joy becomes muted. It's the illusion of safety, but safety without vulnerability is a lonely peace, a peace that feels more like numbness than freedom. You start to realize that what they crave most is also what they fear most: intimacy. To truly connect is to risk being seen, and being seen requires honesty. But honesty threatens their illusion of control. So they play this delicate game, being near enough to feel connection, but far enough to never drown in it. It's a careful choreography, a dance where every step is measured, every word filtered, every emotion restrained. They believe that if they can control the distance, they can control the pain. And maybe, once upon a time, that belief saved them. Maybe as a child, when love felt conditional or unpredictable, distance was the only way they could protect their small, tender heart. So they grew up learning to hold love at arm's length, not because they didn't want it, but because they wanted to survive it. This is the illusion of control, a silent war between the heart's need for connection and the mind's obsession with safety. To love deeply requires chaos, the kind of chaos that breaks your patterns, that invites you to risk being changed. But to an avoidant heart, chaos feels like danger. So they create systems, invisible boundaries that keep emotions neatly contained. They don't want to feel out of control, because to them, losing control once meant losing everything. They will tell themselves they are protecting their peace, but what they are truly protecting is their fear. Control feels like power, but it is often disguised imprisonment. You cannot control love without caging it. And when love is caged, it begins to suffocate quietly. The more they manage it, the less they feel it. Until one day, they realize they've built a fortress so strong that not even love can enter, and not even they can escape. This is the tragedy of emotional control. It gives the illusion of strength, while draining the soul of softness. You may think you're protecting your heart, but really, you're just keeping it from breathing. And somewhere deep within, they know this. They know that the control which once kept them safe is now the very thing that keeps them alone. When love knocks too gently, they ignore it. When it knocks too loudly, they run. Because love has a way of unsettling everything that isn't real. It dismantles illusions. It tears away masks. It doesn't care for your systems or your comfort zones. It comes to awaken, not to appease. And awakening is rarely gentle. So when they love someone but are still trapped in the illusion of control, they will oscillate between warmth and withdrawal. They'll show up on their own terms, retreat when things grow deep, and return just when you start to move on. It's not to play with you. It's to regulate their panic. Because intimacy feels like drowning to someone who has lived most of their life on dry emotional land. You begin to see that their control is their oxygen. It's what they need to feel safe, even if it starves them of love. They may not know how to surrender, but they do know how to survive. And that's what their patterns are: survival. You can't force them out of it. You can only understand that their silence speaks more than their words ever could. And then comes the next layer: conditional presence. They will appear when it feels easy, when the energy is light, when affection can be exchanged without demand. But the moment love asks for depth, for honesty, for patience, for accountability, they vanish into emotional fog. It's not that they don't care, it's that they cannot yet bear the weight of being seen when they don't feel in control. Their presence becomes conditional, not because their love is false, but because their courage is limited. They show up for the laughter, but not the tears, for the beginnings but not the depth, for the comfort but not the responsibility. It is their way of saying, and I want to love, but I don't know how to stay when love gets real. To you, it may feel like rejection. It may feel as though you are not enough to hold their attention, not enough to soften their fear. But you must remember, it is not your unworthiness that drives them away, but their own unhealed history. Their heart is still negotiating with ghosts, trying to make peace with the pain that taught them closeness is costly. So, what do you do when someone's love is conditional? You learn to see through the illusion. You begin to understand that true love does not measure safety in distance, nor affection in convenience. Real love shows up. Even when it's hard, it listens. Even when it doesn't understand. It stays, not because it's easy, but because it's true. Conditional presence will never heal you. It will only keep you guessing. But if you can look past the pain, you'll see the story behind it. A person who is still learning to trust life again. A soul that is terrified of repeating the past. And perhaps in that understanding, you'll find peace. Not in fixing them, but in knowing that love to be real must flow freely. Because love that hides behind control isn't love. It's fear dressed in elegance. And love that only shows up on conditions isn't love. It's longing bound by limitation. The heart was never made to be measured. It was made to be poured out. To withhold it is to betray its nature. And maybe that's what this reflection is really about. Learning to see the sacred difference between protecting your heart and imprisoning it. To understand that while distance can give perspective, avoidance gives only loneliness. The heart cannot breathe in cages, no matter how beautiful they are. There is a quiet kind of fear that sits behind every avoidant heart. Not loud, not visible, but ever present. It's the fear of owing someone emotional truth. The moment connection begins to deepen, that fear awakens. It whispers that love comes with a price, that to be known means to be indebted, that to give too much of oneself is to lose one's freedom. So they guard their truth like a secret currency. Every confession feels like a transaction. Every admission of need feels like surrender. They crave intimacy, but dread the vulnerability it demands. Because vulnerability means being accountable not only to another person, but to themselves. They will speak in partial truths, half expressions that reveal just enough to keep you close, but never enough to make them feel exposed. You may notice how their words are always tidy, how their stories are told with careful distance, as if emotion were something fragile that might shatter if touched too directly. They live in the space between connection and concealment, wanting to be loved, yet terrified of what real love might ask of them. To them, love is a contract where one always risks losing more than the other. So they prefer admiration over intimacy. They'll let you adore them, even rely on them, but they will resist the urge to rely on you. Because to rely means to trust, and trust is the one currency they have learned to spend sparingly. You can sense it, this unspoken struggle between wanting to be wanted and fearing the cost of being needed when they feel you reaching deeper. When your questions touch something real, they withdraw into ambiguity. They smile to change the subject, offer reassurance instead of transparency. And it's not deceit, it's defense. They're trying to keep the balance between closeness and safety, never realizing that the two can coexist only when they stop managing the exchange. It's a lonely way to love, to always perform care while concealing truth, to offer connection in gestures but not in spirit. Deep down they long for a love where they can exhale, where nothing is owed, where being understood isn't a debt to be repaid, but they have not yet learned that the heart is not a ledger, it's a vessel. And the more it gives, the more it fills. You may start to notice how their avoidance is not just about you, it's about what they see in your eyes. Because your love becomes a mirror, and mirrors can be terrifying things. When they look into your affection, they see not only the person they are, but the person they've been running from. They see the parts of themselves they've buried, the child who was once ignored, the lover who was once betrayed, the dreamer who once believed in forever, and facing that reflection hurts. That's the strange thing about love. It resurrects what we thought we buried. It brings the ghosts back, not to haunt, but to heal. But healing requires looking, and looking requires courage. And for many, avoidance isn't a refusal to feel, it's a refusal to relive. They don't want to reopen the memories that taught them love is pain. So they turn away from the mirror. They change the subject. They detach. They distract. It's not that they don't care. It's that caring feels too much like repetition. Every time love reaches them, they remember how it felt when love once left. Every tender word echoes the ache of what was once said and never fulfilled. Every promise reminds them of a promise broken. They carry these invisible imprints like scars beneath their silence. So when you try to love them, you are not just meeting who they are. You are meeting who they've been, their past lives inside their present. And so they love in fragments, half-open hearts, half-built bridges, half-spoken truths. They crave connection, but on their own terms that guarantee safety but sacrifice depth. They will reach for you, but pull back when you reach back. It's not rejection, it's reflex. A reflex born of old pain that never learned the difference between love and loss. It's heartbreaking, isn't it? To watch someone fear the very thing that could heal them. To see them run not from you, but from what being with you awakens inside them. Because love, real love, doesn't just offer warmth, it exposes the cold places within us. It shines light into the rooms we've kept locked, and for someone used to living in darkness, that light can feel blinding. But sometimes, if you stay long enough, not to fix, but to understand, something beautiful happens. They start to soften, not because you force them to, but because love, in its quiet persistence, starts to dissolve the old defenses. They begin to realize that you are not the ghost of their past. They begin to sense that maybe not every story ends in loss. And in that fragile moment of realization, you'll see it, the first crack in their armor. It may come in the form of a confession, or a trembling "I missed you." It might be subtle, a glance that lingers, a silence that feels less like withdrawal and more like surrender. It's the moment they start to risk being seen, even if only for a heartbeat, because somewhere deep within, even the most avoidant soul remembers what it means to love freely. It's buried beneath years of defense, yes, but it's there. The longing to be known without fear, to be held without obligation, to be loved without performance. When love reaches them in a way that doesn't demand, something ancient begins to awaken. They start to see that maybe safety doesn't come from distance, but from trust. That's when the healing begins. Not in grand gestures, but in the slow reintroduction to closeness, the hand that doesn't flinch when held, the conversation that doesn't demand immediate truth, the silence that doesn't punish, but listens. In these moments, they begin to feel what love was always meant to be. Not a transaction, but a sanctuary. It's a gentle undoing. The kind that can't be rushed, the kind that doesn't need words. And as they begin to open, they realize something they've long forgotten. That love is not repetition. It is renewal. It doesn't mimic the past, it rewrites it. It offers a chance to experience closeness without the chains of old memory. Their fear of emotional debt begins to fade, replaced by understanding that love isn't about owing, but about offering, that to be needed isn't a trap but a testament, that being seen doesn't mean losing yourself. It means finally being found. You start to notice the way their eyes change, how they hold contact a little longer, how their silence becomes less defensive and more reflective. It's the look of someone meeting love again, but this time with less resistance. The walls don't vanish overnight, but they begin to breathe. The fortress becomes a home, and in this new space, something remarkable unfolds. They begin to tell their story, not the edited version, but the real one. They start to speak about their past, not as a prison, but as a teacher. The wounds that once made them hide now become wisdom they share. Because when love is met with patience instead of pressure, even the most guarded heart learns to trust its own rhythm again. And that's when they understand the most profound truth of all. That love doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. Every painful chapter becomes a reason to love more consciously. Every scar becomes proof that they've survived. And in that awareness, their fear begins to dissolve. They no longer need to control love, because they finally realize love was never meant to be controlled. It was meant to be experienced, surrendered to, breathed in. And in that surrender, they find what they've been searching for all along. Not perfection, not certainty, but peace. The peace of knowing that real connection doesn't ask you to be flawless, it asks you to be honest. That love, when it's true, doesn't demand that you owe it anything. It only asks that you allow it to stay. So perhaps that is what love's greatest miracle truly is. Its ability to meet even the most guarded heart, not with force, but with grace. It waits, it listens, it understands, and when the time is right, it teaches the soul what it always knew but forgot. That love isn't something you survive, it's something that saves. There's a sacred kind of silence that lives between two people who have seen each other's truth. It's not loud, not desperate, not filled with performance or pretending. It's the silence of safety, the kind that doesn't require you to explain who you are every time you're misunderstood. But when an avoidant soul meets someone they love, this silence feels both terrifying and magnetic. They are drawn to it because it holds what they've secretly longed for, connection. Yet they also run from it because connection asks for presence, and presence demands vulnerability. You see, the avoidant learns early that closeness often comes with chaos. They've been trained by pain to equate love with loss, affection with control, attention with expectation. So when someone reaches for their heart with genuine care, their instincts rebel. They retreat, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too deeply. And to feel deeply is dangerous for someone who's built their safety upon distance. But love, true love, doesn't chase. It invites. It stands still like a mountain, while the fearful heart runs in circles around it. And slowly the avoidant begins to notice that every time they flee, something in them remains behind. A piece of their laughter, a memory of calm, a trace of being seen. They start realizing that perhaps the thing they are running from is not the other person's closeness, but their own reflection in that person's eyes. Because when someone truly loves them, they can no longer hide behind detachment. They can no longer disguise emptiness as independence. The mirror has turned toward them, and the truth is staring back. That's what love does. It exposes the walls you didn't know you built, the wounds you thought you'd buried, the tenderness you've been punishing yourself for feeling, and this revelation can be both beautiful and brutal. For someone who's spent their life mastering the art of control, love feels like chaos because it cannot be managed, timed, or contained. It asks for surrender, and surrender is the very thing the avoidant has feared most. So they may push away the one who makes them feel alive, not because they dislike them, but because being loved forces them to confront what they've been avoiding all along, their own need for love. In the early stages, their avoidance might look like silence, mood swings, or subtle withdrawal. But underneath that, there's a quiet storm, a battle between the old identity that thrives on emotional safety and the emerging self that yearns to trust. It's not that they want to hurt anyone, it's that they've never learned how to stay when things feel real. And yet, the more they pull away, the more they begin to notice something unexpected. The right person doesn't chase with desperation, they remain steady. Their energy doesn't suffocate, it breathes. Their love doesn't trap, it frees. They speak with honesty, not manipulation. They listen without judgment. And this confuses the avoidant deeply, because they were taught that love must come with a price. But now they're beginning to realize that love, when pure, doesn't demand payment. It offers presence. Slowly, this kind of love begins to teach them safety. The kind that doesn't require mass, performances, or perfect words. The kind that welcomes imperfection as a form of beauty. It's in those quiet evenings when they're not forced to talk, yet everything feels understood. It's in the way the other person doesn't chase them when they pull away, but also doesn't disappear. They simply remain, grounded, patient, unshaken. That steadiness becomes a mirror of what the avoidant has always needed to find within themselves, stability without armor. But to open to such love, the avoidant must first meet their own fear without judgment. They must learn that intimacy isn't the loss of control, it's the discovery of peace beyond control. When they begin to soften into that truth, love stops feeling like a threat. It begins to feel like rest, like finally coming home after years of wandering through emotional deserts, surviving on the illusion of self-sufficiency. Love then transforms from something that endangers them to something that heals them. It teaches them that vulnerability doesn't mean exposure to pain, but exposure to truth, and truth, though it stings, always cleanses. Yet not every love will survive this transformation. Some connections serve as mirrors, not homes. Some people are sent not to stay, but to awaken the parts of us that have fallen asleep. The avoidant, in meeting a heart that stays calm amidst their chaos, may find themselves for the first time asking, "What if I don't have to run anymore?" And that question alone can become the seed of healing. Because healing doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds like dawn, slowly, tenderly, moment by moment. There will be days when they revert to silence, nights when the fear returns, and mornings when they feel both love and panic at the same time. But each time they choose to stay a little longer, to speak a little truer, to breathe instead of retreat, they are building the bridge back to their own heart. And maybe that's the deeper purpose of love, not to make us perfect partners, but to make us honest beings, not to erase our wounds, but to remind us that even the most distant heart can learn to belong again. It's a sacred process, this awakening. The shift from seeing love as danger to seeing it as refuge. When the avoidant finally allows themselves to be loved, they realize something profound. The safety they were always searching for wasn't in control or distance or solitude. It was in presence, in simply being fully here. And in that stillness, they understand that love was never about losing themselves. It was about remembering who they are when they stop running. Because deep down, every soul, even the avoidant one, is searching for a place where they can exhale, where they can rest their armor, where they can be seen without being studied. That's what true love offers. Not perfection, not possession, but peace. And peace doesn't arrive with noise or fireworks. It comes quietly, like a sunrise through half-closed curtains, like a breath after years of holding it in. When that kind of love enters your life, it doesn't demand you to change. It simply reveals what was already sacred in you. It whispers, "You are safe now. You can stop pretending. You can stop running." And that's when the avoidant heart begins to open, not in one grand moment of enlightenment, but in countless small moments of courage, a glance that lingers, a truth that's finally spoken, a silence that no longer feels empty. This is how transformation happens. Slowly, gently, authentically, through love that teaches you, not through fear that forces you, and one day, without even realizing when it began, they'll wake up and discover that the distance they once clung to has dissolved, that the walls have turned into windows, that being loved no longer feels like being trapped. It feels like being free. And that perhaps is the greatest irony of all, that what they feared most, intimacy, was never the threat, but the cure. There comes a moment in every soul's journey where the familiar patterns of love no longer feel like home. When you've repeated the same cycles, the running, the hiding, the pretending not to care, something inside you begins to whisper, "This can't be all there is." You start to see that avoidance isn't freedom, it's fear disguised as wisdom. It's the ego's way of saying, "If I never need anyone, then no one can hurt me." But that voice, though convincing, is born of loneliness, not peace. And the longer you follow it, the more you begin to realize that independence without intimacy is just a more elegant form of isolation. When you've been loved by someone who sees beyond your defenses, the illusion of control starts to tremble. You begin to notice that your solitude isn't silence, it's self-protection. And while protection keeps you safe, it also keeps you small. You start to feel the ache of unexpressed emotion, the quiet grief of a heart that longs to be known, but doesn't know how to be touched. It's a strange kind of suffering, not loud, not dramatic, but deep, like the echo of laughter in an empty room, or the warmth of a fire you won't let yourself sit beside. In those moments of clarity, something subtle begins to shift. You realize that avoidance is not strength, it's fatigue. It's the exhaustion of someone who has been running too long from their own reflection. You can't keep outrunning what you are, and what you are is love. Not the needy, dependent kind, but the kind that exists even when you're alone, the kind that does not demand, only radiates, the kind that doesn't chase, it simply is. When you begin to awaken to that truth, you stop fearing closeness because you understand that love doesn't require the loss of self. It's the discovery of a deeper self, a self that isn't threatened by vulnerability, but expanded by it. A self that understands that to be open is not to be weak, it's to be alive. And yet, for many, this realization doesn't come easily. It takes time. It takes heartbreak. It takes standing in the ruins of your own avoidance and realizing that no amount of distance has ever healed what's broken within. It takes the humility to admit, I pushed love away, not because it wasn't real, but because I wasn't ready to receive it. There's a deep humility in that awareness, the kind that softens pride into prayer. You begin to see that the one you kept running from wasn't them. It was the version of yourself that still wanted to trust, to feel, to surrender. You weren't avoiding love. You were avoiding the vulnerability love required. Because to be loved truly means to be seen. And to be seen means your masks must fall. So when someone loves an avoidant, they are not simply loving a person. They are loving a fortress, a story, a wound wrapped in armor. And it takes grace to stand before that fortress without trying to tear it down. It takes divine patience to wait for the door to open on its own. But when it does, when that door finally creaks open even an inch, what emerges is something beautiful, trembling, real. You see, the avoidant doesn't want to live in fear forever. They simply don't know how to trust the tenderness of being seen. But love, when patient and pure, becomes the teacher they never knew they needed. It doesn't lecture, it doesn't demand, it simply remains. Until their nervous system learns that safety doesn't mean solitude. The moment an avoidant feels truly safe, you can sense the change. The walls that once kept love out become the very foundation upon which they begin to build it. Their silence becomes softer, not as a weapon, but as a space of contemplation. Their eyes, once guarded, begin to hold a quiet gratitude for being seen, for being accepted, for being loved without having to perform. And that's the transformation love brings. It doesn't just open the heart, it rewires it. It teaches the soul to stay where it once wanted to flee. It turns avoidance into awareness, detachment into discernment. And from that awareness, something even deeper blooms. Compassion. Compassion, not only for others, but for oneself. Because once you understand why you've run, you stop condemning yourself for it. You see that the walls you built were never about pride, they were about survival. You did what you knew how to do with the emotional tools you had at the time. But now you are awakening. Now you are remembering that survival is not the same as living. To live is to allow yourself to be touched by the world, to let the wind of someone's affection move through you without resisting, to let love transform you from the inside out, not through grand gestures, but through quiet moments of presence. It's in the gentle morning conversations, the shared silences, the forgiveness after misunderstanding. That's where intimacy grows. In the ordinary, not the dramatic, there's something sacred about that realization, that love is not meant to rescue you, but to remind you of your wholeness. The right person doesn't fix your wounds, they mirror them. They help you see the places within yourself where light still struggles to enter. And as painful as that may feel, it's also divine. Because it's through those very cracks that your healing begins. When you stop running and start allowing yourself to be loved, life begins to soften. You no longer approach relationships with suspicion or the need for control. You start to listen differently, speak differently, even breathe differently. Your presence becomes calmer, your eyes gentler, your heart less defensive. You stop demanding perfection and start honoring progress. You realize that love is not about certainty, it's about courage. The courage to stay open, even when you don't know how the story ends. And maybe that's what maturity in love really is. Learning to love without needing to own, to receive without fearing loss, to give without resentment. It's learning that love is not a transaction, but a transformation. It doesn't always feel comfortable, but it always moves you toward truth. The avoidant who once feared love begins to see that love was never the threat. It was the mirror, and that mirror, once frightening, becomes the window through which they finally see their own beauty. They begin to understand that connection doesn't diminish freedom, it expands it. Because real freedom isn't isolation. Real freedom is the ability to open your heart fully and still remain grounded in who you are. There's a subtle joy that emerges from that space, a peace that comes not from avoiding life, but from embracing it without attachment. You stop running toward or away, and instead, you begin to dance with what is. Every emotion becomes a teacher, every connection, a mirror, every goodbye, a doorway. And somewhere in that gentle unfolding, love ceases to be a pursuit. It becomes your natural state. You no longer need to chase it because you've become it. The one who once avoided love now lives as love. Walking slowly, speaking softly, breathing deeply, no longer afraid of being seen, no longer hiding behind the illusion of control. They've learned that the most beautiful form of strength is softness, and that the deepest kind of peace is found not in solitude, but in surrender. For when you truly surrender, not to another person, but to the truth of what you are, you discover that love was never something to find. It was something to remember. It was always here, quietly waiting beneath the fear, whispering, "You can stop running now. You are safe. You are home." There comes a point when the avoidant no longer hides behind silence, but begins to listen to it, not as an escape, but as a mirror. Because silence, when entered with awareness, becomes the voice of the soul. And in that voice, they begin to hear something they've spent years running from. The sound of their own longing, not the longing for another person alone, but for the connection they once denied themselves. It's the longing to be touched, not just physically, but spiritually, to be held, not just in arms, but in understanding. And as they start to listen, they realize that love was never their enemy. Their resistance to love the fear wasn't in being loved, it was in being known. Because to be known is to stand naked before truth, with no masks to hide behind, no roles to play, no rehearsed answers to protect the heart. Yet this very nakedness, this exposure of the soul, is the beginning of peace. When they begin to see love not as a demand but as a reflection, something inside them softens. The heart, once tense like a clenched fist, slowly begins to open. They start to understand that love doesn't mean losing yourself. It means returning to yourself, without the armor, without the pretending. It's like walking into the ocean after years of drought. The water feels both terrifying and healing, but once you surrender to it, you remember that this is where you were always meant to belong. The avoidant heart begins to see that love doesn't cage you. Fear does. Fear convinces you that love will take something from you. But love, when it is true, gives back what fear has stolen. It gives you presence. It gives you stillness. It gives you a mirror to your own divine nature. It whispers you don't have to protect yourself from something that was sent to heal you. Yet this awakening doesn't come through perfection. It comes through patience, through the small moments where you choose to stay when you want to run, through the quiet courage of vulnerability, saying I'm scared instead of pretending you're indifferent. That's how healing begins, not in grand gestures, but in the sacred ordinary. The moment you breathe through your fear instead of feeding it, the moment you let someone love you without trying to prove you deserve it, the moment you stop measuring love through safety and begin to experience it through surrender. And surrender is not a collapse, it's an awakening. It's the end of the war between the heart and the mind. It's the moment when you stop needing to win love and instead allow yourself to receive it. You realize that the love you kept rejecting was never conditional. It was your own reflection calling you home. In that realization, something shifts. The one who once built walls begins to build bridges. The one who once ran begins to rest. They no longer see intimacy as a trap, but as an invitation to grow, to be known, to expand. Love becomes less about possession and more about presence. It's no longer about keeping someone or being kept. It's about meeting one another in freedom. And freedom, real freedom, doesn't mean solitude. It means being so rooted in yourself that closeness no longer threatens you. It means being able to hold someone without losing your own shape. It means knowing that love isn't a prison. It's the air both souls breathe together. In this stage, love transforms from emotion into awareness. It's no longer a feeling that rises and falls with the tides of mood. It becomes a way of being. You begin to see love everywhere, in the eyes of the person who forgave you when you withdrew, in the stillness of the morning light, in the quiet grace of your own breath. Love becomes not something you find, but something you embody. And when love becomes embodiment, fear begins to dissolve, because fear cannot exist where truth lives. The avoidant learns that intimacy doesn't mean dependency, it means alignment. It's when two souls walk beside each other, not to complete one another, but to remind each other of their wholeness. Through this realization, they begin to understand what it means to love deeply. It's not about possession or permanence. It's about seeing another soul clearly and saying, even if we must part, what I've seen in you will stay with me. That's the kind of love that heals, not through control, but through reverence. It's in that reverence that the avoidant heart finally finds peace, because the battle has ended. The need to prove, to hide, to run, all of it fades. In its place, there's a stillness that feels like truth, a knowing that says, I am no longer afraid of being seen. I am no longer afraid of being loved. They begin to realize that love never asked them to change who they are. It only asked them to become who they were before fear told them to hide. And with that awareness, they start loving differently, gently, consciously, not out of need, but out of overflow. They no longer fear closeness because they no longer confuse it with losing themselves. They understand that the deepest intimacy begins when two souls can stand side by side, whole, free, unafraid, and simply be love in its purest form becomes a mirror through which both people see God reflected in one another. Not a God of religion, but of presence, the divine essence of connection, the eternal thread that runs through all beings. It is in that realization that they finally understand why love frightened them so much, because it reminded them of their own power, the power to feel, to heal, to create, to forgive. Love wasn't here to break them, it was here to awaken them. And so they soften, their edges round into gentleness, their silence becomes serenity, not avoidance, their independence becomes interdependence. A dance between giving and receiving, holding and releasing. They begin to live with open hands, no longer grasping for control, no longer fearing loss, because they understand that love cannot be lost when it becomes who you are. You start to see this change in subtle ways. The avoidant who once feared vulnerability begins to speak from the heart. They say, I love you without calculation. They allow tears to fall without shame. They listen without planning their escape. They love, not because they've been convinced to, but because they've remembered how. And that is the quiet miracle of transformation. When the one who once avoided love becomes love's purest vessel. When the one who feared being seen becomes the mirror through which others find themselves. When the one who built walls begins teaching others how to open their hearts again. That is how life works. The places that once held your deepest fear become the ground for your deepest wisdom. The pain you once thought would break you becomes the lesson that awakens you. And the love you once rejected becomes the very light that guides you home. And so, the avoidant finally understands, love was never about finding the right person. It was about learning how to stay with yourself, how to stay with truth, how to stay with love even when it feels uncomfortable. Because love doesn't always feel safe at first, but it always leads to freedom. And when you arrive there, in that freedom that holds both self and connection, you realize something profound. You were never too distant to love, nor too broken to be loved. You were simply waiting for a love that matched your depth, that could sit with your silence, that could meet you at your stillness. Now you see that love was never meant to be chased or managed or understood. It was meant to be lived. It was meant to move through you like breath, effortless, rhythmic, alive. And perhaps in the end, that's all love ever asked of you. Not to be perfect, not to be fearless, but to be present, to open your heart even if it trembles, to let someone in even if it's new, to stay, not because you must, but because your soul finally knows. This is what it means to be free. So in the quiet that follows all the running, all the defending, all the pretending not to care, there is a simple truth waiting, like a sunrise that never stopped rising. Love was never the storm we thought it was. It was the shelter we kept walking past, too afraid to enter. It was never trying to take anything from us, only to give us back the pieces we had abandoned in our fear. You see, every wall we built was never against love, but against our own reflection in its eyes. We thought protection would save us, but it only taught us loneliness. We thought control would make us powerful, but it only made us tired. And somewhere in that exhaustion, we finally stopped running. We turned around. And when we did, love was still there, patient, unoffended, unchanged. That is the quiet mercy of life. It waits for you to be ready. It doesn't rush your healing. It doesn't punish your fear. It simply keeps showing you, through people, through silence, through loss, that the very thing you fear is the thing that will free you. And when you finally let it in, when you stop fighting the softness that was always meant for you, you realize that love was never an event. It's a state of being. It's not what you fall into. It's what you awaken into. Then the walls fall, the tension fades. You no longer need to prove your worth or guard your heart like a fortress, because you've seen what love really is. Not ownership, not rescue, but recognition. The quiet meeting of two souls who finally remember who they are. And maybe that's the most sacred revelation of all. That love was never about finding another person to complete you, but about remembering the wholeness that's been within you all along. That the one you were seeking was the one you became, once you stopped running from your own light. In the end, love isn't a destination. It's the gentle return home, to truth, to peace, to yourself.